I'm absolutely delighted to be on a call talking to Sue Christy, who is on the ground, shall we say, on the ground, supporting people who have been directly affected by this awful conflict that we see unfolding on our TV screens over in Ukraine. Sue, tell everybody about you and what you're doing.
Sure. So I have been deployed to, I work in disaster and crisis management, predominantly in the UK, and I attend when critical incidents have happened in the workplace. Not only attend, I help organisations prepare and plan. I'd like to say I spent a lot of time doing that, but the truth is we don't spend enough time doing that. So mostly it's reactive, and I help organisations when the worst kind of things have happened, focused on getting these people to safety, including their families and pets, which has been interesting. What we are doing is, essentially setting up evacuation centres and running and managing evacuation centres for staff and their families, who are mostly women, children, grandparents or grandmothers particularly. We are providing a place of safety and security and settling before we kind of move things on to what next for everybody, really.
What kind of issues are you seeing?
Whilst there's no denying this is a terrible situation, we're kind of seeing people kind of coming together, supporting one another really well. We've got a really mixed mood, I suppose, in terms of, but I would say probably what has struck me most is the calm. That some have been able to leave relatively calmly. Not everybody has been, particularly at the sort of beginning, perhaps, of the invasion, more exposed to the bombing and the shelling. That's changing now, so I suppose that the calm, perhaps, and the community is one of the most striking things here.
When we've spoken before, one of the things that we talked about was almost a helplessness of those people who have made it out of Ukraine and are now in safe places. That sort of helplessness, and that they can't help those that they've left behind, and almost a survivor's guilt, if you like. I don't know if that's the right phrase to describe this, but how are you seeing that manifest, if at all, and what are you doing about it to help those people? What can be done?
Well, I think when we spoke, particularly, we were referring to many of the men. I mean, the situation is pretty difficult in that the conscription means that that's come into force, kind of come into force. But it's some men were able to leave before that happened. These are some of the men that we are alongside who have wanted to go back and have felt terribly guilty about not being there. What we have been able to do is to help people see that there are other things they can do from a place of safety that actually are really, really needed. And so kind of finding purpose and meaning in being here from a place of safety in terms of what can be done. And that can include sort of trips to and from the border, collecting families, helping with medical supplies and other things like that.
That's really interesting. That sense of purpose comes through an awful lot, especially when we're faced with huge change and adversity and uncertainty, and literally people's lives hanging in the balance. And I mean, you speak to people who have survived and made it out of Ukraine every day. I mean, what are they telling you that they need?
Well, that's really interesting and a really good question, because I think one of the things that we can all be guilty of is thinking we know what people need. And we kind of don't, so I think in terms of where we can go to from our sort of places of our safe lives and whatever, is thinking that we need to go into giving people sort of counselling and trauma and grief help and whatever, but actually we're way at the beginning of the sort of Maslow hierarchy here. We are, you know, sort of working in providing people with safety and shelter and attending to basic needs first and foremost.
Yeah.
From an organisational point of view, I think there's one word that I would say that people need more than anything else, and that's information. And then information and more information. I think one of the things that I'm aware that can be leaving people feeling very apprehensive and so much more tension than they already are experiencing is kind of not knowing from the organisation's point of view what's happening. So I think information is king here.
Yes, and not only information, but the speed of that information.
Yeah, you know, much of this, Terry, well, a couple of things. I think, you know, we have to remember this has come on the back of COVID as well. People have already, you know, suffered enough, and then there's this on top. So the context is that people are already pretty worn down, and then this is happening. So we've had so much organisational change within COVID anyway. I mean, the irony is people who may have not seen each other for 2 or 3 years because of COVID are maybe now able to see each other in these situations more than, you know, they were when they were in their home cities or whatever, which is odd. And so much of this is we've kind of got a bit of practice at it. We know we just need to get on with getting that information out there.
I wondered, what should employers be doing right now to support their people on the ground?
It's about responding in a humane and compassionate way. I think that in terms of where organisations are now, I think we're seeing a lot of people now, you know, perhaps applying for, you know, asylum, coming over to the UK, and lots of companies sort of putting the message out that we're supporting the refugees or the crisis. But actually, I think one of the things that is going to be really important is making a decision, you know, whether they're kind of going to be supporting their staff to support refugees, or it's whether the organisation itself is going to support the refugees through its staff. If we're really going to be doing this, you know, kind of being consistent and coming up with a clear and consistent sort of stance or statement that everybody knows, all managers are able to make decisions about unusual requests. You know, it's kind of empowering managers to manage and to, you know, kind of give people time off if they need this, or being a bit more flexible, cutting them some slack. There are going to be lots of things we can do. Being flexible is going to be one of those, but being clear really with what is the message our organisation is saying here.
What should organisations be doing to support their people as they support refugees from Ukraine?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, because there are a lot of people that are now sort of signing up to these schemes and whatever.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it really is for big organisations or even small ones. I think all the stakeholders have to be involved and on the same page and working together. There are going to be sort of requirements. You know, people are going to need. You know, I might need tomorrow off to go and take, you know, the family or whatever to register with the doctors. Is our boss going to say, well, yes, of course you can, or, you know, you can, but we're going to take this time off in lieu, kind of thing. So we kind of just need to be clear how long it's going to go on for. You know, we don't have to have it all figured out right now, but we need to have something figured out, and maybe recognising that we can revisit this in 2 or 3 months. We don't have to have it, we don't have to know it all.
Think through a more comprehensive plan is what I'm hearing you say, rather than just going, yes, we're signing up for that without giving it much thought.
And sort of think it through a little bit, because it's complex, you know, and we're talking about people and people's lives, and I think what we can do from afar is be a bit box ticky about it and just think, you know, but actually when you're amongst, you know, these are you know, some incredible people with some incredible skills and lots to offer, and we just have to kind of respond with a humane and compassionate sort of leadership, I suppose. You know, it's it's so important to kind of just see the people and not the sort of the status of refugee or evacuee or whatever it is we're saying. Just to give you something, you know, to hang that on a little bit. So we had there was some pottery, a little bit of pottery painting was happening, and there was a sort of little place there where you could buy things to take home, and you know, sort of some nice plates or whatever. Some of the kind of people were quite distressed because a lady particularly had kind of realised that there was a plate there that had the colours in that would match her new kitchen that she literally just had finished, and has now been kind of, you know, flattened in Lviv, or I can't remember exactly where it was, and you just kind of think it's just a sharp reminder. These people have lost well, everything, you know, and they're not it's not the material stuff particularly. It's, you know, somebody mentioned that they left their favorite pair of scissors behind. I mean, it's kind of, you know, it's that kind of stuff. I'm trying to think about leaving our houses in a hurry, and, you know, what do you take, and what do you leave behind, and what's important and what isn't. And so it's about just realizing and just seeing the people, and it's really hard to do unless, you know, you really try and put yourselves in their shoes. And the only way I think we can do that is try and imagine that that's our mum, that's our brother, it's our sister, it's our niece, our nephew, our kids. You know, how would we want them to be treated?
Is there anything that you think that employers and managers could do to support their people, sort of try and not make sense, because I don't think you can make sense of things like this at times, but certainly process it maybe?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we also, you know, we need to support our managers and our senior leaders, and you know, because we're all people, and I think everybody is going to have, you know, be impacted by what they're seeing and what they're hearing. And I think maybe for everyone, it's really key to try and have some perspective here in terms of what's happening. It's interesting because you know, I'm over here with lots of other people from home, from the UK and other places. And actually, I think the people in the UK particularly are really, really anxious about us. You know, the media controls the narrative. And yes, it is a terrible situation. It is horrendous, and it's natural and normal, whether we've got family or loved ones in the Ukraine or not. I think hearing about cyber attacks and images of the conflict in other ways have put many people on really high alert, even without a personal connection to the country.
Yeah.
Part of the human experience is that we're going to feel empathy for other people, and I think maybe for managers, for people generally, we have to kind of get comfortable with the uncomfortable sometimes. People are going to be frightened or worried or want to talk about their worries. It's kind of normal to do that. We kind of tend to almost want to close it down, you know, to sort of say, oh, you know, we sort of try and make it better. But I think what we can do is normalize it and to say, you know, you're right, it's a scary situation, and we can acknowledge it because we're human. But the other thing is maybe to understand what's actually happening and why, keeping things in perspective. So understanding perhaps a little bit more about, and I didn't know this until I got here, but I've tried to educate myself to understand it, the history, what's going on really, why is Russia's attempt to seize Ukraine happening? It began in the 18th century, and, you know, it's kind of been going on, and understanding a little bit more, getting some context around the events. Some people are just watching 24-hour news, and you know, it's just kind of triggering more and more anxiety. We're barely watching any news, and so are the families and people we're with. And you really can forget it's happening. Just for a while, you can almost forget it. But I know that's not the case, particularly at home. I think just trying to take some control where you can and limit some of this exposure is going to also really help, and just seek news maybe from credible sources, try and read it instead of watching it on the TV. You know, I think just kind of getting the context about what's happening rather than the sensationalized the TV and the news that we're seeing.
So how can we support people who want to come to the UK to get employment? Is there anything that we can do to make it easier for them?
Well, yes, I think there's a lot we can do. And I think first and foremost, we sort of maybe want to make sure we're on the government websites and finding out all of the requirements for employment and agendas and how to source talent from the mass pool of people that are coming into the UK. I do think that, there are going to be some great people coming through, and we kind of need to welcome them and make, make it a little bit easier for them to kind of get in and get the job. And again, it comes back to all the sort of bindweed, I think, that can go on in organisations. Make it simple. Let's help people, give them childcare, elderly care, for employees and their families, because that's what people are going to need. A lot of people I'm speaking to don't want to come to the UK. They're kind of perhaps wanting to stay a little closer to home, because the idea is that they're going to be heading home soon. A lot of them perhaps wanting to stay in Slavic-speaking countries, where culturally it's similar, and there's a chance that they may be heading home in a matter of weeks.
For people who work in places where there are perhaps employees from Ukraine, but then there may also be employees from Russia, for example. I mean, how do we manage that sort of tension, if you like, or is that just a perceived tension? I don't know if you've seen that where you are.
Not particularly. I think that what struck me at the beginning was that maybe some organisations were able to send a message out to their employees about our thoughts are with those with families in the Ukraine, but kind of left out Russia. And I think that there are an awful lot of Russians that don't want this either. I suppose the message from the organisation may be being heavily weighted in the humanitarian one rather than a political one. I suppose in a workplace, an organisation, there are levels of behaviour that are acceptable, and there are levels of behaviour that are unacceptable, and perhaps it comes into that territory without kind of over-engineering it. It's just there are acceptable standards of how we treat each other, no matter what the subject is.
In the midst of all this suffering, has anything surprised you or given you cause for hope or optimism?
Every day, and I just, people are amazing. I think that hasn't surprised me as such. The weather surprised me. I think I said to you at the beginning. And I think the families, I've been just struck by the depth of connection you can have without common language, and also the strength of human relationships.
I wondered if there were any sort of top tips or key thoughts or considerations that employers should have right now in supporting their people, whether they be indirectly or directly affected.
Don't make assumptions. Ask people what they need. And it's okay not to know. This isn't a time for being experts. I think one of the things, Terry, that's quite difficult, I'm going to say frustrating, maybe it is frustrating, I have to set my hands a bit, is that when people want to wheel in mental health professionals, and I am one of those, but I don't need to be wheeled in. This isn't really, we're not there. This is about sort of basic needs and sort of almost establishing contact, orientation, kind of grounding, being alongside, and a lot of people will be okay, and so it doesn't mean people don't suffer, because they are and they will, but they will be okay.
Thank you so much for your time. I hope that you will be safe and take care.
Thank you.
And make sure that you're looking after yourself too while you're out there.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry.